Okay. All right. Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to receive testimony on stopping the next attack and keeping our city streets from becoming the battleground. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. This weekend, our nation was shaken by terrorist attacks in Minnesota, New York, and New Jersey. We are thankful that no one was killed, but our thoughts and prayers go out to the injured victims and their families. We are still searching for answers in this investigation, and I appreciate New York Police Department Deputy Commissioner Miller being here today to update us on this case, sir. Thank you for being here today. And our hearts go out to the people, good people in New York. The threat environment is as high as we have ever seen it, especially from radical Islamist extremists. Last year, this committee tracked the most homegrown jihadist plots ever in a single year in the United States. And 2016 could be even worse. Americans are rightfully worried that our city streets are once again becoming the battleground. Fort Hood, Boston, Chattanooga, San Bernardino, Orlando. Some have said this kind of regular terrorism is the new normal, but I strongly reject that argument. Complacency is not an option. Terrorists are threatening American lives, our livelihood, and our way of life. We cannot falter with so much at stake. That is why yesterday I released a national strategy to win the war against Islamist terror, with proposals for fighting the enemy overseas and stopping radicalization in our communities. My strategy explains that one of our highest priorities must be to make sure our frontline defenders are better prepared to stop acts of terror. This means that police, fire, and other emergency professionals need to be able to detect suspicious activity and catch potential terrorists before it's too late. And if a plot goes undetected, they must be equipped to respond quickly to prevent loss of life. We saw that play out this weekend when our first responders acted heroically to protect their fellow citizens. So to the witnesses testifying today, I want you to know that this committee is grateful for your service to our communities and your sacrifices for our country. I also want to convey one message above all else, and that is that we have your backs. We are committed to give you the tools to fight terror. And we are also committed to giving you the public support that you deserve in these challenging times. It's been a hard year, especially for law enforcement. You have faced tough questions in the press, and you're staring down violence in our streets every day. That is why this committee has fought to protect important DHS grant funding that you rely on. In fact, later today, the House will vote on my bill to authorize an additional $30 million in annual grants to help your communities guard against the dynamic terror threat, including active shooter attacks, IEDs, and suicide bombers. We have pushed federal agencies to share intelligence with you and share it more quickly and comprehensively. We need to ensure the federal government properly incorporates the valuable CT information that you develop from the streets, the street intel, and the communities where you serve every day. Today, I hope you will share with us what is working on the front lines and what is not. In particular, we want to know how we can better support you to respond to this unprecedented terror threat. Last week, I went to the 9/11 memorial service and listened to all the nearly 3,000 names of those killed read aloud. We do this each year to remember the fallen and to honor the heroism we saw on that fateful day, from first responders, from police, and everyday citizens. Like those brave Americans we lost Our witnesses this morning have sworn an oath to protect our people. So before we start, now let me just say again, thank you. With that, the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank you for holding today's hearing. In light of the recent terrorist attacks in Minnesota, New Jersey, and New York, I'd like to offer my sympathies to the victims and their families. I believe we all agree that terrorism and any other violence on our streets is an all too common occurrence. We must act boldly to stem this tide. I'd like to thank the witnesses for their service. Mr. Miller, thank you for coming to town. I know it's a very busy time for you, and obviously you're still doing your work while you're before this committee today. Sheriff Dimmons, thank you for your service. We still stand with Orlando and have not forgotten about the victims of the June terrorist attack. Mr. Chairman, in just the past 4 months, incidents in Orlando, Dallas, Minnesota, New York, New Jersey have brought into sharp focus the complex, diverse, and confounding nature of the lone wolf threat. Those who are inspired to carry out such attacks do not neatly fit a single profile or espouse a single hateful or violent extremist ideology. We saw this scenario in the Orlando attack, where the perpetrator espoused several conflicting ideologies and seemingly was not a part of a terrorist cell. Just this past Saturday, a lone actor who's being investigated for possible ties to ISIL attacked 10 people at a mall in Minnesota. Also last weekend in New Jersey and New York, it is believed that the suspected bomber, who also shot 2 police officers, may have been inspired by Al-Qaeda and right now appears to have acted alone. In July, a perpetrator who had no formal affiliation with any particular group, but may have been inspired by a black separatist group, shot and killed 5 police officers in Dallas, Texas. We know by now that our law enforcement is a target for terrorists. We also know that law enforcement's job is made more difficult by the availability of assault weapons. Earlier this month, one of our subcommittees received testimony from representatives of local law enforcement identifying the availability of guns and the lone wolf threat as serious problems for police. In fact, I would note that one of our witnesses today, Chief Acevedo, has gone further in describing this challenge by stating that the widespread availability of guns in this country makes it possible for potentially dangerous persons to legally acquire weapons to cause mayhem and colossal casualties. Chief Acevedo goes on to state, whether it's ISIS abroad or homegrown extremists, the threat exists and haunts police chiefs every day. I look forward to engaging Chief Acevedo on this point. Even the terrorists know that it is far easier to carry out an attack in the name of that ideology on U.S. soil with a gun than in Europe. A testimonial by one former member of ISIL published this summer underscores this point. The former terrorist explained ISIL's view on terrorist recruitment in the U.S. as follows. For America, it is easy to get them over the social network because the Americans are dumb. They have open gun policies. We can radicalize them easily, and if they have no prior record, they can buy guns. We don't need a contact man to provide guns for them. Mr. Chairman, we've seen the scenario the former ISIL member mentioned unfold with assault weapons here in this country. We saw it in San Bernardino, where perpetrators inspired by ISIL walked into a soft target and killed 14 people and injured another 22 with an assault-style weapon. Tragically, we saw it again this June in Orlando when a perpetrator walked into a nightclub and killed 49 people with an assault weapon. Our witness, the sheriff of Orange County, immediately recognized the impact that assault weapons was having on our homeland security. As Sheriff Dimmons said in the aftermath of the shooting, we have to look at some of our gun laws and make a determination of what we stand for and just how prevalent some of these assault rifles are available today. Otherwise, we don't make some modification, we're going to continue seeing some of what you see happening here now, here in Orlando. Mr. Chairman, I wholeheartedly agree with you that radicalization and recruitment is a problem. But after 9/11, the nation made a vow not to give in to terrorism. Therefore, I will not concede that our city streets, the places where our constituents live, work, and play, are at risk of becoming battlegrounds like Syria and Afghanistan. As lawmakers, we must make it more difficult for terrorists to carry out attacks on U.S. soil. Taking action to prevent terrorists from having access to assault weapons would be a good start. However, it seems that in the waning days of this Congress, there's more appetite for advancing un-American and counterproductive proposals, such as closing the borders to Muslims or ethnically profiling whole communities. Secretary Jay Johnson testified before this committee, noted that with the current threat picture, Homeland Security cannot be achieved without sensible gun control laws. It is time for us to rethink how we prevent terrorism. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Other members are reminded opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses here before us today on this topic. I want to thank all of you for being here today. First, we have Chief Art Acevedo. He is my police chief, and he's also my friend in my hometown of Austin, Texas. Next, we have Sheriff Michael Bouchard from Oakland County Sheriff's Office in Oakland County, Michigan. Next, we have Sheriff Jerry Demings from the Orange County Sheriff's Office in Orange County, Florida. And finally, Mr. John Miller, Deputy Commissioner for Intelligence and Counterterrorism at the New York City Police Department. I want to thank all of you for being here, particularly Mr. Miller, who I know is very busy with the work and task at hand back home in New York. Thanks to all of you for being here. I now would like to recognize Chief Acevedo for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Thompson, and members of the committee. I come here before you today as the first Vice President of the Major City Chiefs organization, which really represents 68 of the largest cities of the United States, and the Chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. I want to first of all thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your committee for your outstanding leadership and your work in this vital area at a time when I think the threat not only continues to expand, but the consequences of terrorism are hitting our communities every day. I can tell you that the one thing that keeps us all up is the issue of the lone wolf. We've been talking about lone wolves for several years now, but just in the last few days, we've seen the consequences of these needles in the haystack that can become radicalized, and we can no longer call this an emerging threat. It is an imminent threat, it's an ongoing threat, and it is a threat that we must continue to fight. We've witnessed the horror of these lone wolves, not just this weekend, but in my own city. Although we're talking about Muslim extremists, we also have to keep in mind that we have our own homegrown extremists with very different views, including extremely left or right. They're extremists no matter which way you look at it, and we can't lose sight of that. As you recall, Mr. Chairman, about 3 years ago now, 3 Thanksgivings ago, we had a young man by the name of Mr. McWilliams, who was part of a extremist movement called the Phoenix Priesthood, who on that Thanksgiving night went around Austin trying to burn down the Mexican consulate, and with an AK-47 type of assault rifle attacked the consulate, attacked the federal courthouse, and attacked our headquarters, firing 108 rounds into our occupied headquarters, nearly striking one of our detectives in the middle of the night. Fortunately, we had an American hero, a Texas hero, that was able to stop the threat with one shot, and only in Texas can a police sergeant take a shot while he's being shot at with an AK-47 from 312 feet away, strike the suspect right in the heart while holding 2 horses with one hand. I think it speaks as to the professionalism of the American police officer and the courage, despite the national discussion around policing today, which I can tell you, it's as imperfect as it is, we still have the best generational cops serving. Now, the lone wolf, we know that they're out there, we know that they're hurting us, we know they're going to continue to hurt us, and radicalization is how they get to that point. It's important for this committee, especially for elected officials, to temper our comments and temper our broad brushes we're using to paint members of a community, of a religion, of a race, of a national origin as criminals or as terrorists. We know that individuals that feel marginalized or feel that they're not welcome end up being much more susceptible to radicalization, whether it's from a street gang or an Islamist overseas that is using social media to radicalize folks. So it's critical that we continue as a police departments and sheriff's departments and as a nation to build bridges, to make people feel welcome. The communities that we serve, whether they're Muslim, African American, Hispanic, Asian, Christian, Jewish, they are our greatest force multipliers. They are the ones that are going to spot the suspicious behavior. They are the ones that have to feel that they are embraced and welcomed by law enforcement and by this nation, that they can come forward. And if you look at just what happened in New York City, it was a community member that found one of the unexploded devices. It was I believe, a member of the Sikh community that happened to own a bar that trusted the New York City Police Department, that felt that they are included by the New York City Police Department, embraced by the New York City Police Department, and came forward and helped the New York City Police Department capture that suspect before he can carry out more terror in our nation. So again, outreach is key, and we look forward to continuing to do just that for our community. The criminal intelligence enterprise, Mr. Chairman, you know, is really important to us. We continue to work on the national level with the sheriff's departments, with their intel commanders groups, to really be able to tie some of the issues that we see across the country, to be able to not just disrupt but prevent terrorism. And I look forward to talking about that. One of the areas that we really need help is the law enforcement terrorism prevention program. There's really no national coordination, no designated official at DHS with responsibility to prepare and implement a terrorism prevention plan, and LETP really needs to be explored and hopefully absolutely strengthened. One of the biggest frustrations I have as a police chief, and I think my colleagues will share this, is that as it relates to grant funding and the distribution of funds, FEMA is still not the right organization to be spearheading that. FEMA is much too much focused on response. Well, if we're responding to a terrorism attack, we've already failed the American people. We have got to have another office that understands the importance of prevention and the importance of disruption. And unfortunately, FEMA, despite our efforts as police executives to put more effort in terms of funding for prevention and disruption, continues to focus on response. And my response to that is, it's too late, not only in terms of the psychological impact on this nation, and the economic impact. We've failed at that point, so we really want you to look really hard at how those funds are being distributed and who's responsible for those funds being distributed. The law enforcement leader's position at DHS, the Assistant Secretary of Local Law Enforcement, was established by Congress, but the position still cannot deliver the results that I think was the vision of Congress, because it lacks authority, budget, and staffing. We hope that you will consider remedying this organization by further directing DHS to put some teeth into that position. Fortunately, the incumbent Assistant Secretary of Law Enforcement, Heather Fong, continues to work with us, but she's able to do so because of the efforts of Deputy Secretary Mayorkas, who has played an integral role in helping her despite those challenges. Encryption, as we've discussed, Mr. Chairman, continues to be a great challenge, and I hope that we will look at having industry, when we put in a search warrant, not sit on it for days on ends when we have seconds, hours, minutes to try to disrupt the next attack, whether it's from a person with mental illness, an Islamic radical, or some other radical. We have to have laws that make these things a priority. I can tell you that's extremely frustrating. I want to also say the emergency communications is an ongoing priority for us at the major cities, and I want to thank Congressman Donovan and Ranking Member Payne for your leadership in making communications a standalone asset at the federal level. Lastly, UASI. As you know, we were a UASI city in Austin. We're no longer UASI. The funding has really been reduced to about a third, and we hope that and pray that today that your bill, Mr. Chairman, 5859 passes because it will be instrumental in helping us continue to prepare and disrupt and respond to the next threat. And Mr. Donovan, I just want to say thank you and Chairman McCall for 5308, which was really doing what we should do. It's kind of like asset forfeiture from drug trafficking organizations. We absolutely should take the interest from terrorist organizations and invest that interest in the safety of the American people and in the safety of our communities from everyday crime and from terrorism. So I thank you all for your leadership, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Chief Acevedo. Chair recognizes Sheriff Bouchard.
Well, good morning, Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Thompson, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Michael Bouchard. I'm the Sheriff of Oakland County, and I've been in law enforcement for almost 30 years and run one of the nation's largest sheriff's offices. I'll be speaking briefly, but in my actual testimony I submitted, I go into greater depth, so we'll kind of be at the 30,000 foot on this. I'm the Vice President in charge of Government Affairs for Major County Sheriffs Association of America, and I'm testifying on their behalf. And like all of you and all of our fellow Americans on 9/11, our world was changed dramatically. I was proud to lead a team to work at Ground Zero immediately after the attack. And over the past 15 years, our country has made great progress in our ability to prepare for, respond to, and prevent terrorist attacks. The men and women of law enforcement work every day to ensure our individual communities and our local neighborhood streets, as the chairman said, do not become the next battleground. The nature of violence in America and around the world has evolved, and as the good chief mentioned, the expansion of encryption, the use of social media for mass propaganda, inspiration of lone wolf attacks, and selective recruitment is very evident and very prevalent. We in the law enforcement community find ourselves in a new age where criminals and terrorists enthusiastically operate beyond the confines of law through encrypted networks and applications and mobile devices. The MCSA partnered with the major city chiefs to examine that issue at depth of going dark, and I'd like to submit our joint paper into the record, Mr. Chairman, following this discussion.
Without objection, so ordered.
The homegrown violent extremists are another example of the evolving dynamic threat environment facing local law enforcement. HVEs can come from a variety of backgrounds and driven by either religious or ideological factors. They present a uniquely dangerous situation for local law enforcement because they're familiar with U.S. customs and day-to-day activities. Robust community engagement, as was mentioned by the chief, is very important in a direct way of combating violent extremism. It requires commitment from the agency leadership to meet with leaders of diverse communities through dedication and consistency. Those relationships become resilient. As evidenced by recent radical Islamic terrorist attack in San Bernardino and others, the threat to public safety and national security posed by our government's refugee and visa programs are real. When a query is conducted and no information is available from their home country, it is impossible to verify the information needed to make an informed decision on the threat level posed by an applicant. The DHS OIG published a report on Monday that found the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services granted citizenship to over 800 individuals from special interest countries who had been ordered deported or removed under a different name. That's the vetting process we're talking about. The Refugee Act requires federal government to consult regularly with state and local governments concerning sponsorship process and the intended distribution of refugees to state and localities. Despite this requirement, no one from the federal government has made any effort to consult with my county members of our association on this issue. There's been over 1,200 refugees settled in my state, with the majority in my county, and not one phone call. With the increased threat environment, law enforcement has been continually asked to do more with less. The President has proposed an FY17 budget that cuts UASI funding by 45%. The total amount of SCAP reimbursements received have been reduced every year. Through executive action and not legislation, the administration recalled certain 1033 military surplus equipment. On the same day as San Bernardino terror attack, my office received an order to return an armored personnel carrier to be destroyed because it looks too militarized. An armored vehicle pulls up every day at a bank or a grocery store to protect money, and it's viewed as normal. But if law enforcement pulls up in the same vehicle at the same building to protect lives, somehow it's bad. In FY16, Congress allocated $39 million to DHS for a grant initiative specifically to help local governments prepare, prevent, and respond to complex coordinated attacks. Law enforcement stakeholders proactively offered suggestions to FEMA to address law enforcement needs, and we're quickly approaching FY17, and no progress has been made on that issue either. After I self-deployed at the direct request of involved agencies to Ground Zero and Hurricane Katrina, we engaged in great dialogue with FEMA about how to formulate, create, equip, and train regional response teams. Where does that program stand today? I don't know. It's been 2 years we worked on that, and it's completely fallen off the map. Despite the administration claims our borders are more secure than ever, undocumented individuals continue to illegally enter the homeland. If we don't have border security, we do not have national security. I'd like to thank the committee and its staff for all of their work. Bipartisan and countless bills have passed this committee with the aim to secure our homeland. I'd also like to thank the chairman for his commitment and collaboration and willingness to engage us in local law enforcement. It's greatly appreciated and often not heard at other levels. I'd also like to thank the committee, and I look forward to future questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff Bouchard. Chair recognizes Sheriff Demings.
Good morning, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Thompson and members of the committee. It is indeed an honor and a privilege for me to provide testimony today during this hearing to discuss ways to stop the next attack. I am not here today to be a doomsday reporter, but I do believe that our nation has experienced a paradigm shift in our global war on terror. I agree with the chair and ranking member that we should not accept the current state of affairs as the new normal. There have been numerous recent violent incidents on U.S. soil, which indicates that terror subjects have brought the fight to our homeland. They are now focusing on soft targets in our cities and counties, which puts local law enforcement officers squarely in the crosshairs of violent extremists. My community, the metropolitan Orlando area, experienced such an attack on June the 12th. Members of my agency responded to assist the Orlando Police Department in the initial response involving an active shooter. The incident remains under investigation by the FBI, but it is believed that a lone gunman killed 49 innocent people and injured another 53 persons in the Pulse nightclub incident. The incident began shortly after 2 a.m. when Omar Mateen began randomly firing at patrons of a club that catered to the LGBTQ community on a night designated as Latin Night. Like no other time in our history, if we are going to be successful at reducing the attacks on American citizens by violent extremists, federal, state, and local law enforcement authorities must improve our working relationships in 3 ways. Number 1, we must improve the access to information, the sharing of actionable intelligence information that can be used to identify and arrest subjects involved in plotting attacks before an attack occurs. And number 3, funding for counterterrorism efforts to include training and equipment must be increased. As it relates to information, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, should reassess its policy on precluding state and local law enforcement agencies from having access to the ICE database that identifies individuals as being in this country illegally. officer and public safety become a major issue in instances when law enforcement officers do criminal history checks in the field through the National Crime Information Center, NCIC, and they are not made aware of a subject's immigration status. Immigration enforcement is clearly a function of the federal government, and sheriffs do not seek this authority. We have enough on our plates already. Our concern is for the safety of our officers. When officers or deputies encounter someone and the person is here illegally, that person assumes the police already know they are illegal and have the authority to arrest and deport them. Local and state law enforcement should know who they are dealing with, even if they cannot arrest for immigration violations. As it relates to sharing information, Florida sheriffs have seen increased communication from the Department of Justice and DHS to state and local law enforcement concerning critical incidents. Assistant Secretary Heather Fong at DHS's Office of Partner Engagement has been a driving force behind this, and most sheriffs and police chiefs have been invited to participate in conference calls following significant national and international events affecting law enforcement and public safety. I am the current president of the Florida Sheriff's Association and give credit to DHS Secretary Johnson and FBI Director Comey for increasing communication with state and local law enforcement and for pushing facts to sheriffs directly as opposed to sheriffs receiving information from the national news media. In order for American law enforcement to prevent, respond to, and mitigate domestic terror attacks, analytics and training will be integral to stopping the attacks from proliferating. Central Florida has been the benefactor of numerous projects funded in previous years by the Urban Area Security Initiative, or UASI grant program. We have been working for the past 2 years to get DHS funding restored to our region. Primarily, members of Congress from both the House and Senate have worked with Orlando Police Chief Mina and me in these efforts. We have petitioned DHS and FEMA to reassess the Orlando, Kissimmee, Sanford, Florida MSA and the need to strengthen and secure Central Florida from another terror attack like the Pulse nightclub incident. The Central Florida region has been fortunate to receive approximately $45.5 million in UASI funding since 2004. The Orange County Sheriff's Office has managed the funds. The funding received prior to 2013 was critical to our region's ability to prevent, protect, respond to, and recover from not only terrorism, but a broad range of other threats and hazards. We are only as good at preventing a terror attack as the quality of information we receive about that attack. I will briefly discuss one of our most notable regional partnerships in Florida called the Central Florida Intelligence Exchange, or CFIX for short. It is located in Orlando and is only one of 3 fusion centers in Florida. It serves as a central repository of databases that are currently being used by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and other federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. In addition to its counterterrorism focus, CFIX serves as an all-hazards fusion center, assisting agencies in the mitigation and assistance needed to recover from hazards such as hurricanes and natural disasters. CFIX assists with the investigation of crimes that possibly contain a nexus to terrorist activity or other homeland security issues. In other words, fusion centers located throughout the country are pivotal to our nation's mission of stopping terror attacks. Due to the lack of funding, some critical needs of our CFIX or Fusion Center have been lost. We have reduced the number of analysts, which could have worked to provide intelligence information that could prevent a terror attack. Through the National Infrastructure Protection Program, we received UASI funding for a video camera surveillance project in the tourist quarter downtown Orlando, and in areas near the University of Central Florida. Due to a loss of funding, we have not been able to expand the project into areas around our top tourist destinations. Prior to June 12, 2016, we held more than a dozen UASC-funded training exercises over the past 12 years. I believe the agencies responding to the Pulse incident flawlessly initiated an active shooter response because of training paid for through historical UASC funding. You have a list of the training exercises in your material. We train to respond as a region to a terror attack or other disaster. About 150 of my deputies, along with multiple other law enforcement, fire, and EMS agencies, responded to assist the Orlando Police Department during the Pulse incident. Because of the infrastructure connections in our region, it is a natural thing to have regional capability and vulnerability assessment. Regional preparedness, response, and recovery efforts are also pivotal to the mission of stopping and/or reducing terror attacks. Presently, FEMA uses the Office of Management and Budget's geographical boundaries defined in the Federal Register when calculating risk scores for MSAs. We believe that the boundaries of our Orlando MSA should be expanded to include the Brevard area to the east and the Volusia County MSA to the north. We realize that that is a heavy lift. In September of 2015, we began the process of lobbying the federal government to combine the Metro Orlando MSA with Brevard and Volusia. This was broadly supported by federal, state, and local elected officials, and numerous letters were written to the FEMA Assistant Administrator of Grants Programs, the OMB Statistician, and the OMB Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. You have a list and copies of the letters in your materials. With attacks in places like Boston, San Bernardino, Orlando, Dallas, and other places, most recently in New York, New Jersey, Minnesota, there is a need to have an overall increase in UASC funding across the nation. An overall increase in UASC funding would expand DHS's ability to fund the top 100 high-risk areas from 85% to 90% or better of the areas with the most risk. Areas like Central Florida will no doubt make the list. Congressman Micah has expressed support to increase funding nationwide. In 2016, the Orlando MSA was 34th on the list of 100, when only 29 were funded. Local and state agencies have equipment needs and the requisite training for use of the equipment, including mobile command centers, surveillance equipment, tactical weapons, armored vehicles, and explosive ordnance detection is important. In closing, thank you for allowing me to speak, and I ask the committee to analyze the current MSA methodology formula and the data used in the formula to reflect current threats and vulnerabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Chair recognizes Commissioner Miller for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your continued help and support with our programs, as well as our New York delegation, Peter King, who we're always in close touch with, and Dan Donovan, who comes right out of the New York City law enforcement community, as does Kathleen Rice. Good morning to the members of the committee. First, I would like to thank the chairman for giving us this opportunity to talk about this. When we talked about this testimony several weeks ago, the idea was to talk about the emerging and changing threat and how we might respond to a terrorist attack. Nobody had any idea that we would be sitting here within days of an actual terrorist attack talking about how we did respond. New York City has been the target of more than 20 terrorist attacks, including this one. Some have succeeded, but most have been prevented through the use of good intelligence and a robust counterterrorism program. The threat we face today has grown out of a group called Al-Qaeda that morphed into an international network of affiliates, one of which turned into a movement on its own called ISIL that has pioneered exploiting every advantage of globalization. Today, while al-Qaeda operates in the shadows, occasionally sending out one-way videos to adherents, ISIL operates out of Syria using the internet and social media tools to deliver a call to arms to those who would travel to Syria and fight for ISIL there or in Iraq, but also understanding how to leverage propaganda that includes compelling videos, two-way conversations over social media applications, both encrypted and unencrypted, an online magazine filled with messages extolling violence, giving useful tactical critiques on attacks that have already happened, including the Orlando shooting, and giving instructions on how to make bombs. These are specific, custom-designed messages to urge people who could not come to Syria to fight or Iraq to kill Americans here. The messages hold a promise to those who are receiving them of valor, of belonging, of empowerment. And these messages containing these false promises resonate particularly with recruits who are failing in life, living in the margins, who have low self-esteem, or feel isolated. No city in America has been the target of as many plots and attacks as New York City. No city has paid as much in blood as we did on 9/11, and in the 15 years since, no city has invested as much human capital and money in the effort to prevent, if possible, or respond, if necessary, to a terrorist attack. We thank this committee. We thank our appropriators on other committees. We thank the Department of Homeland Security and Secretary Jay Johnson for steadfastly continuing to support those efforts with funding. That said, the NYPD and the City of New York invest significant amounts of our own budget to support those efforts. This year alone, the NYPD created the Critical Response Command. The CRC is a highly trained, specially equipped, uniformed force of over 500 officers that work full-time every day as a counterterrorism force in the streets of New York City. They protect critical locations and shift between key potential terrorist targets depending on the intelligence we've evaluated that day in the global threat stream. We've provided the same weapons and training to our Strategic Response Command, the SRG, a citywide flying squad that can be called on to assist our Emergency Service Unit, which is a rescue-oriented but SWAT-capable unit that is our go-to first responders for any crisis. That adds up to approximately 1,800 officers with special weapons and tactics capabilities who are in the streets of the City of New York. That is unmatched by any municipal police department on the globe, as far as we know. We've also trained over 8,000 regular patrol officers in tactics to counter the active shooter, as we have seen this trend grow over recent years. Those are the officers who are most likely, because of their proximity and number, to arrive at such a scene first. The NYPD has also built what is widely regarded as the most sophisticated intelligence bureau outside of the federal government. That bureau works hand in hand with our federal partners, particularly the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and Homeland Security. Over at the JTTF in New York, we have over 100 detectives assigned inside the JTTF that are integrated and operating cross-designated as federal law enforcement officers. The NYPD has spent over $300 million over the last 8 years, combined city and federal funds, to build and maintain the DAS, or the Domain Awareness System. This combines a network of cameras across the city, over 8,000 of them, with data from our 911 call system, with license plate readers, with radiation detection sensors across the city, with law enforcement databases. In the last year, under former Commissioner Bill Bratton, that data, which faced inwards to people like me at police headquarters, was pushed outward. It was turned outward to the people who need it the most and could use it the most, and that's the cop on the street. Every police officer in New York has access to that information from their department-issued smartphone. This phone is able to access the DAS network. It also means during a terrorist incident, as we saw just this week that having 1,500 people who work full-time on counterterrorism can quickly be changed to 36,000 in the street. We're able to push law enforcement information, pictures of the suspect, information we had to every police officer in the street who was working. When we decided to go out with a picture of a suspect we had probable cause to arrest. All of that with the power of just hitting a send key. Every element of those tools and tactics that we've discussed here today was fully exploited in the moments starting after 8:30 p.m. on Saturday night when 2 bombs were placed in New York City on that evening. I also have to say that the seamless cooperation between the FBI and the NYPD and our Homeland Security partners, whether that was FBI ERT, evidence response technicians, working in a post-blast with our crime scene investigators, bagging and tagging the same way, sending everything to the same lab, the FBI lab at Quantico, whether it was our NYPD bomb squad detectives working side by side with their SABT, Special Agent Bomb Techs from the FBI, our Detective Bureau, our Intelligence Bureau, the JTTF. It was a force multiplier that worked that case as if they did it every day together, because they do. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. I now recognize myself for questions. I think the last time I saw you, John, we were in New York at the 9/11 ceremony. The next day, received an intelligence briefing at the intelligence unit at NYPD. Little did we know that within days there would be a terrorist attack in the streets of New York. I was presented a video that I wanted to share with the committee that was put together by the New York Police Department that I think really encapsulates the threat moving forward and in many ways is prophetic in terms of what we saw happen last Saturday.
Is our Khilafah in all its glory, remaining and expanding.
Alhamdulillah, this is a ni'mah from Allah, wallahi. I'm thinking like I'm still dreaming. I'm feeling like I'm still dreaming, wallahi ladhim. I'm thinking like I'm in the dream world. Like if I not wake up and, oh, I'm in Raqqa, I'm here, I'm in Sham, Allahu Akbar. This is a blessing, wallahi. You have to be here to understand what I'm saying.
به نسمو على النجم به نحيا بلا ذل حياة الأمن والسلم شريعة ربنا نور به نسمو على النجم به نحيا بلا ذل حياة الأمن والسلم. لنا المرهفات الغضاب البواسل لنا صيحة الحق حين التصادم فنحن الأسود الغباة الضياغم نفل الحديدا بعزم شديد نفل الحديدا بعزم شديد إذا الحرب جاءت بلحن الرصاص نزلنا على الكفر نبغي القصاص يساقون للموت ما من مناص ونسقي الهدى من
Vous octroyez le droit de nous massacrer au nom de votre liberté chère à vos yeux. Pour nous tout vaut bien, vos vies n'ont rien de sacré. Votre sang coulera pour vos crimes odieux. Vos lois permettent des dégâts collatéraux. Vos soldats tuent nos enfants et sont des héros. Vous pleurez à chaudes larmes pour quelques morts. Quant aux milliers de tués, pas le moindre remords. Vous dupez le monde par votre éloquence, tout en légalisant votre délinquance. Attention, nous sommes prêts à rendre les coups tous nos sabres sont libres, mais pour trancher des coups.
Wir haben nur ein Leben und Allah er hat's gegeben. Die Zeit, sie ist am Laufen, also Brüder, schenkt euch an. Taten lassen reden, die Erde ist am Beben. Khilafah, was mit Segen, eine Gabe von Allah. Wenige von wenigen, sie sterben für eine Sache. Sterben oder siegen, la ilaha illallah. Jetzt ist er gekommen, es ist nicht zu verschweigen. Jetzt ist er gekommen, wir nennen es Qital.
Celui que nous unifions, pour Allah nous vivons et sacrifions, pour Allah celui que nous glorifions, pour Allah oui nous vous terrifions, pour Allah celui que nous unifions.
So today is the day you experience what it's like to be targeted for your belief, inshallah. I give my pledge of allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, Amir al-Mu'mineen. He's called for jihad in the lands of the Crusaders, and I'm responding to his call.
كان سواء بيته كده أبو بكر البغدادي القريشي ألف سنة سنة بيته كده
أبيع أمير المؤمنين أبو بكر البغدادي الحسيني القريشي
بيعتي لأمير المؤمنين أبو بكر البغدادي الحسيني القريشي حفظه الله.
بيعة أبو بكر البغدادي القريشي.
Commissioner Miller, thank you for that video. We saw that obviously last week before the tragic events in New York on Saturday. What I was struck by is stay home and fight. Used to be come to Syria and join the fight. Are we seeing a changing, evolving message now from coming out of ISIS Syria to stay home and attack in the United States?
I think we are. I think that the messages from Sheikh Adnani, especially the pre-Ramadan message, which called on people to attack where they were, has shifted from come to Syria and fight with us on the battlefield to, as one of the messages had clearly written, it said, we love you more doing actions in their countries, referring to countries other than Syria, meaning we'd rather have you fight at home than come here and fight on the battlefield.
Which concerns me from a Homeland Security perspective, because I think as we have some success militarily in Iraq and Syria, we're going to see the battleground coming more here to the United States. This is a copy of Mr. Rahami's journal that was found on his person when he's taken into custody. I know you're familiar with it. He talks about the sounds of bombs will be heard in the streets. Streets praised Osama bin Laden, his brother. Talked about Anwar al-Awlaki in Fort Hood, Texas. He talked about pressure cooker bombs and pipe bombs in the streets as they plan to run a mile. He talks about, God willing, the sound of bombs will be heard in the streets. Gunshots to your police. Death to your oppression. You continue your slaughter against the Mujahideen, be it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Palestine. He wrote, according to his complaint, and in another section of the notebook, he wrote that his guidance comes from the man that you mentioned, Mr. Adnani, who was the chief ISIS spokesman and external operations chief who was killed by an airstrike, who talks about killing where you are. Precisely, I think, the evolving threat that we're facing. Commissioner Miller, I have to ask you this question. Was the suspect, Mr. Rahami, at any point in time under the radar? Is there anything we could have done differently to have stopped it?
I'm sure, as in after every incident, our federal partners will go backwards through this case and reevaluate that. But based on what I've seen so far as part of the investigation, he seems like many suspects who came into contact with the system at various times and was handled to the extent that the system, the law, and the guidelines that we operate under would allow them to.
And it's unfortunate in many of these incidents, and we stop most of these things, as you know. But the ones that we miss, it seems like it's always after the fact that somebody comes forward and says, oh, I noticed he was radicalizing, or I saw this or that, but they fail to report it to authorities. And I think that's probably what we'll find out to be the case here. Chief Acevedo, we have a bill on the floor today authorizing nearly $40 million for grants to train in active shooting, to train in IED, to train with suicide bombers. Can you tell me how that could help your city and my city, the city of Austin, help better prepare for this type of event?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. As you know, that training is really key to being prepared to respond. And unfortunately, with the tightening budgets around the country, one of the first things that goes away is the training budget. And so from the perspective of the major city chiefs, your bill will go a long way in preparing our resources throughout the nation and the big cities and throughout the counties. And without it, I don't think that we can prepare to the extent that we need to. Fortunately for us in Austin, we make it a priority, and so we sacrifice, but not every city has that ability, and I think that for us, we desperately need the funding.
The time's expired. Chair now recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you very much. I think from the outset, there's no question this committee is absolutely committed to keeping America as safe as it can possibly be. 100% is what we strive for every day. And the men and women in various departments, we salute you for that work. One of the things we struggle with is when these incidents of the lone wolves appear. You get a lot of people after the fact trying to say, well, you should have done this, you should have done that. And so now there's a discussion that, well, maybe we need to put more surveillance on individuals and to some degree, even profile individuals. And I think Mr. Miller, since New York is kind of the melting pot, and as a practitioner of this, especially in light of the bartender dialing 911 saying, I think we got a problem. Can you just kind of explain that kind of engagement with those communities, what your experience has been?
We've worked very hard to strengthen the NYPD's engagement with our partners in the Muslim community. You cannot profile the community that you also, at the same time, count on to help you in these cases. We have had many people from the Arab American community, from the Muslim community, come forward and help us in various investigations over various times. And in the context of that video, we've also kind of sat down with a core group of our best community partners and played all the same propaganda to them on the idea that most mainstream community leaders aren't on their computers watching these things, but we wanted to be able to expose them to the type of clever messaging and powerful propaganda that some of their young people might be susceptible to, and work with them to try and figure out how do you counter that message and what do you use. So this is a conversation with a community of partners that has to keep going, and you can't keep it going by separating them.
Thank you very much. A lot of my opening statement talks about the proliferation and ownership of assault weapons. And some of us have even promoted the notion that why should you be able to buy an assault weapon being on the terrorist watch list? You know, and what we're trying to do is close every potential vulnerability that we know of. Has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. It's just that if you're too bad to get on a plane, then it's clear in the minds of a lot of people, you ought to be too bad to own a gun. Or you should have some opportunity to prove that you're not. So, Chief Acevedo, can you kind of comment on where that assault weapon and exotic guns come to play in your area?
Yes, sir. I mean, clearly, one of the challenges we have in this nation is the proliferation of firearms and the fact that we use the Second Amendment as an excuse to not pass common sense laws that will help keep firearms in the hands of law-abiding Americans of sound mind. And I can tell you, coming from the state of Texas, where the Second Amendment is king, I spent a lot of time talking to conservative members of our community. They are in favor of universal background checks. They're in favor of closing the gun show loophole where we can watch people go in there, and if you've got the cash, cash is king. You can buy whatever you want. We have a responsibility as a nation, I think, as policymakers. I would urge this body, which is the only body that can get it done at a national level, to celebrate the Second Amendment by ensuring that we take steps to ensure that responsible people are gun owners and not people that will do harm to their fellow Americans, and quite frankly, as it relates to mental health, that might do harm to their fellow Americans and themselves. And so we need help. I know that the support's out there. I think that the surveys show that from the American people, and at the end of the day, it's the will of the people, and I hope that this body will put the politics aside and really join the American people in being pragmatic and taking steps to keep those firearms out of the wrong hands.
Thank you. Sheriff Dimmons, you had 49 people killed in your county by someone with one of these weapons. But more importantly, that individual was what we call a lone wolf in terms of somebody who we could not really bring a nexus to somebody overseas or something like that. Can you, in your law enforcement experience, explain what the challenge is for identifying extremists in communities? Whether you're a member of the Ku Klux Klan, whether you're a member of ISIL or any other entity, and how does that play into your day-to-day law enforcement experience?
Thank you for the question. I can tell you that it is a challenge for us to identify the individuals who mean harm to our nation. We are only as good as the information that we receive, so I believe that we have got to improve our analytical capabilities in sharing criminal intelligence information across the federal, state, and local authorities. We sometimes see where we operate in silos. All of these issues tend to happen in local communities, and what we say to our residents is that if you see something suspicious, we want you to tell us about it. And they're often giving information to us at the local level, and we push it to the federal level. But sometimes once it gets there and it is analyzed, it doesn't come back in a systematic way so that we can use that actionable intelligence information in thwarting a probable terror attack. In some cases, even as it relates to our gun laws, sometimes it doesn't make sense what happens. I'll give you an example. Just a couple of days after the Pulse nightclub incident in Orlando, there was a reporter who came to town, an international reporter from the UK, who was writing a story, and to prove his point, how easy it is to acquire an assault weapon in America, He bought one. He went to a local licensed gun dealer and was able to buy an assault weapon. He was not a U.S. citizen, but at some point had been in our country and had some form of legal status at some point. Before he returned to the UK, he brought the assault weapon that he had lawfully purchased to one of my sheriff's substations, and he said, I don't want it, I can't take it back into my country. The reason I bought it was to prove upon how easy it is, and I'm not even a U.S. citizen. And so I have said to people like Director Comey and others that, to me, that makes no sense, because as American citizens, if we were in the UK, we couldn't go there and buy an assault weapon. And so why should he have been allowed to buy one in our country? So somehow we've got to look at those types of, I think, situations that occur. The other thing I see gaping holes in, as it relates to the mentally ill, we have a national database that is supposed to have information about individuals who've been certified through the courts to have some form of mental illness that disqualifies them from buying a firearm. But quite frankly, the information isn't being put into the database because of this lack of I think, understanding within the mental health community what constitutes mental illness. And so we've got to improve there as a country as well.
Thank you. Yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony. Commissioner Miller, again, congratulations on a very successful weekend. And I know the investigation is ongoing, but I was actually down on 23rd Street the morning after, and what you said about the FBI and the NYPD is true. You couldn't tell one from the other. They're working so closely together. What I would like to follow up, though, and I really wouldn't want this to get caught up in semantics, but the ranking member, if we use terms like profiling or whatever, there's also good police work, though. And, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember, I'm older than you, but that when they were going after the mafia of New York, the FBI and the NYPD were in the Italian-American community, not because they didn't trust Italian-Americans, they knew that's where the threat was coming from. Also, when they were going after the Westies, whether it was Hell's Kitchen or every bar on the west side of Manhattan, there were police undercovers, there were FBI undercovers to try to get information. And I think, as an Irish-American, I didn't consider that profiling. I mean, that's where the threat was coming from. It was coming from the Irish-American community, certain elements of it, even though 98, 99% are law-abiding. And I just think in New York, where you have a number of Muslim communities and neighborhoods, even if, and there aren't, the overwhelming majority are cooperating and are supportive. But if there is going to be something happening, I don't see how it's considered unconstitutional or bad police work to have undercovers, to have informers, the same it's done when you're tracking down any other type of crime where it's coming from a particular community or organization.
Excuse me. We operate under the Handshoe Guidelines, and the Handshoe Guidelines specifically say that we operate on information, on behavior, on actions, but we do not place undercovers or spies or people into the community to watch people who are engaged in completely constitutionally protected activities, whether that's at a restaurant, a house of worship, or a meeting. We're also not lacking for business. I think Representative King, and there's very few in Congress who know as much about this as you do, given the time that you've spent in this field, that in the 15 years since 9/11, through every suspicious encounter that's been reported, we have amassed a large number of names, incidents, reports, and when they're filed away, as you see in the other day, or in the Orlando case, or you can pick your case, there's two schools of thought on that. One is, well, if you already knew about this person, why weren't they stopped? That is one that often doesn't consider the thresholds that we have to operate under. The other is that, if you have that many contacts with that many people over that period of time, it's increasingly likely that the next time something happens, it's going to involve somebody that you knew, heard about, investigated, bumped or otherwise checked out. Now, that's a good thing in that when you're assessing who to look at first and they come up in those records, it gives you a basis to go forward. Well, it's also a liability in that people have somewhat of a misconception about our ability to put someone under surveillance, leave them there indefinitely. You know, in the case of the New York case, these were contacts that happened in 2014 with no demonstrable thing that happened in between that time and this time. That's not, and I'm not prejudging this. Somebody will go back through it with a fine-tooth comb because we always do. But it's not realistic to say every time someone comes on the radar, you're going to be able to follow them or their friends and associates for an extended period of time while you have investigations that are on the front burner involving people who are demonstrably dangerous.
Would it violate any guidelines, for instance, with Rahami, and we're assuming a hypothetical here, if there were at least, I believe, 2 encounters with the FBI, one because of the travel, one because of the assaults against family members and his father saying he was a terrorist, for the local police to be told about that so that they will be alert to anything else they might hear. I'm not saying any warrantless search, I'm not saying hounding the guy, but I'm just saying for the street cop to say, keep your eyes and ears open on this guy in case you hear something about him, that he would be at a different level than just the ordinary citizen walking down the street.
Based on my understanding of our guidelines, it wouldn't. Based on my recollection of the Attorney General guidelines and the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Operations Guide, I don't believe it would either.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. My time's just about up. I just wanted to get that on the record because I think because many of the unfair allegations have been made against the NYPD over the years from certain organizations and from the media. So, and thank you for your outstanding service. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would just point out for the record that the independent inspector general of the NYPD just completed an audit of 10 years of Intelligence Bureau records and determined that 100% of the records they evaluated showed that there was a proper purpose and basis for every investigation and that they were carried out within those guidelines.
And I would just make the editorial comment that reporters got the Pulitzer Prize for talking about the abuses by the NYPD, even though they've been cleared on all those charges. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, just let me say, with respect to the New York City Police Department, the literature since 9/11 has clearly established that the New York City Police Department counterterrorism and intelligence is probably the most effective in all the world. It's extraordinary work that's done in counterterrorism. Unfortunately, you never get credit for what didn't happen, and what you do every day is preventing things from, in fact, happening. So it's great, great work. And as they say, the terrorists only have to be lucky once. Counterterrorism officials have to be lucky all the time. But it's also worth noting here that since 9/11/2001, a period of 15 years, 94 people were killed by Islamic terrorists. 157,000 Americans have been killed with guns. You're 3,000 times more likely to be killed by an American with a gun than a terrorist. Every day in America, 90 people die from gun violence. In Orlando, 49 people dead, 53 people wounded, deadliest attack on U.S. soil since 9/11. One shooter, semi-automatic rifle, semi-automatic pistol, legally purchased. One shooter, 49 people dead, 53 people wounded. Newtown, Connecticut, 26 people dead. 20 kids between the ages of 6 and 7, first and second graders, dead. Most had multiple wounds in them. 6 adults were also killed, most of whom were diving in front of the kids to shield them from the shooter. One shooter, legally purchased guns. Sensible gun safety has been mentioned here, has been rejected by this Congress despite the fact that 90% of the American people support sensible gun safety legislation. You know, people often invoke the Second Amendment to justify the continuation of this hell. But the framers of our Constitution in establishing the Second Amendment could never have anticipated this kind of hell. The topic today is stopping the next attack, how to keep our cities from becoming a battleground. Well, they're already a battleground. And there's a moral contradiction when you have, as the ranking member said previously, a terror watch list. These are individuals that are known to be involved in some degree in terrorist activity, yet at the same time, they are allowed to purchase guns, semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic pistols, the very guns that are found in all of these mass shootings. So you can't, with any credibility, hold a hearing with the topic stopping the next attack, how to keep our cities from becoming battlegrounds, without fundamentally addressing what most people on this panel agree with, and that is very commonsensical gun safety measures. I would ask you, first of all, Deputy Commissioner, to respond.
Well, I think that the broad law enforcement support for the assault weapons bill at the same time as the crime bill that was signed on the White House lawn and then expired, and the conversation that came out of that for years with no change was one indicator. And cynical people would have said, when a member of Congress is shot down in a public place, that would change. But the conversation after the shooting of Gabby Giffords went on for about 3 weeks and faded away. Some might have argued that when our citizens are being killed in their movie theaters at a Batman movie, that would have ended the discussion. And Colorado passed a tough gun law, and the governor was run out of the state after that. Some might have said when they kill our kindergarten children in their schools, that would be the straw that broke the back. But we've talked about that for a while, and nothing happened there either. So in some measure, when you consider the fact that the greatest loss of life on U.S. soil since 9/11 in a terrorist attack happened at 2 o'clock in the morning on a place off the main path, an LGBT club on Latino night by a lone wolf gunman, you have to ask yourself, have we figured out who we are? And do we want to change?
Chair now recognizes Mr. Rogers from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the witnesses for being here and their participation. I also want to commend New York. You look at what happened with the recent investigation after this attack and previous attacks, and then what happened with the London bombings and the Spain bombings. Closed-circuit television was critical in the investigation and the quick apprehension of the suspects in every case. And I would urge all of our major metropolitan areas to emulate New York in the placement of those closed-circuit cameras. But I did want to ask y'all, my experience has been that, just as was the case here in New York, that local law enforcement really has to have a good relationship with the federal officials for everybody to be successful. What do you see as ways that we can improve communication between state and local officials and the feds that you need to interact with? And do you get a chance to exercise regularly with them? If not, why not? Just start with Mr. Bouchard and Mr. Demings.
Thank you, Congressman. That's a very good question. We do interact and work extremely well with our federal partners, but the communication is a salient point that we've raised for a number of years. In fact, on many of the conference calls, the preamble is, we've probably heard more already about this incident in the news than we're going to talk about today. Mm-hmm. You know, most of us, I presume, have a top secret clearance sitting at this table, if not at least secret. And there's a need, I think, for real-time information sharing on that capability. That's not in place. Years ago, probably a decade ago, I suggested that they create such a platform. And an encrypted cell phone was created as such, and I paid for it for my Homeland Security Division chief, myself, and we had a few of them. lo and behold, find out they don't really work. So we no longer have a device to communicate real time on a direct pressing need. We almost have to go back to the days of runners where somebody has to go.
You're talking more about equipment. I'm talking more about personal relationships. Do y'all have a chance to interact and develop personal relationships so you know Bob at the FBI or whoever is the key
Yes.
guy you need to get in touch with? Do you have a chance to do that?
We do, and we have great relationships, but when I'm talking about the equipment, if there's a timely need for sharing information, there's a lag because literally we have to go to the same location to communicate that. I had a meeting in my state, and the sheriff from LA was there and had something unfolding that was at a secret level, and we were looking for Coast Guard stations to get him in communication. That's a problem when terrorists can communicate in an encrypted platform and we can't. So the relationships are there. I would say that one of the challenges that we face, though, across the country is we build a great relationship with our SACs, and then they're moved, usually about every 2 years. They come and go very frequently. I know professional development and organizational needs are important, but it is a challenge. Once you develop a deep relationship, I think I've been through probably 6 SACs in my tenure.
Okay. Sheriff?
The only thing that I would add is I talked about the fact that we have a fusion center in Orlando, and because of that fusion center, it forces us on a daily basis to work across jurisdictional lines, and that is not the case in most cities around America. We only have 3 in the state of Florida when we have multiple large metropolitan areas, and so I do believe that there is a need to increase the number of fusion centers because, again, they work on the prevention side, collecting information and data that can be used to prevent an attack. And this whole conversation today is about preventing an attack. So I believe that that has to be part of the solution. It forces us to work together, and it also allows us to gather better information, actionable intelligence information, that is.
Chief?
In terms of our relationship in Austin, we have a phenomenal relationship with our local SAC.
Do you have a chance to exercise with
We have not exercised because of funding is an issue, and that's why, again, I hope that 5859 passes, and so we can actually do some more exercising with them. But in terms of information sharing, it is better today, and the relationship is better today than it's ever been for my region. However, I think that depends a lot on the SAC. Fortunately, I have a good SAC, and I've had good SACs, but I also push back pretty hard when they're not sharing information. But I don't think that that's still the case nationwide, that it's not even across the country.
Thank you. My time has expired. Thank you all for what you do for our country.
So recognizes Mr. Payne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for their testimony this morning. Also like to recognize 29 individuals that were injured this week and pray for their speedy recovery. And also the 2 brave officers in Linden, New Jersey, who engaged the culprit, Officer Hammer and Officer Padilla of the Linden Police Department, which is in my district. Many gun safety laws are enacted at the state level. So while you might live in a state with strict gun laws, such as mine, your communities might remain vulnerable because of the lax gun laws in neighboring states. How does this patchwork approach to gun control affect your policy efforts? Mr. Miller, if you could take a stab at that.
We have, if not the toughest gun laws in the nation in New York City, certainly one of them, but none of our guns come from New York City. That has been true for many years. We have mandatory minimum sentencing. We have a rigorous permitting process, but most of our guns come from out of state.
and the ability and the access to these assault weapons in other states really poses a great potential for acts such as we've seen over the course of the last several years. And when I talk about it with my colleagues that feel that there could be a potential infringement on the Second Amendment rights, you know, getting an understanding of what we end up against in our communities is something that can be horrific, as we saw in Orlando. And my argument to people and law enforcement that sometimes did not see the wisdom in trying to get these weapons off of the streets is, you know, what happened in Dallas was my greatest fear, that, you know, I would try to tell them one day these weapons are going to be turned and used against you. And in Dallas, we saw that happen. And that is the reason that we fight to try to make sure that these weapons are not available to people that should not have them, and really, I don't think should be available to the public. They're only going to be used against law enforcement. And to think that a terrorist would have the upper hand on our law enforcement just not bode well with me. So can you, the events of the last weekend, you know, really have put the country on edge. The information we received was constantly being updated, and you know, the situation was very fluid. I think lessons learned from Boston helped us in this situation, and it was really incredible to hear how fluid this situation has become through interagencies. Can you talk about the federal government and how it shared relevant information with you, to respective to, you know, the different law enforcement organizations involved?
From the moment the explosion happened, I called the police commissioner and I called my FBI counterpart. In the time it took me to drive to the scene, my FBI counterparts were there. We came up with a game plan, and we received continuous information throughout that night with the development of every clue, a phone that led to a subscriber name, a fingerprint that led to an individual, phones that, devices that were connected from the New Jersey case to other devices, people who were connected to devices through physical evidence, and there was nothing hidden, nothing held back, nothing too classified. We sat together in the same command post. Customs and Border Protection and DHS played a vital role in helping us understand who was who through their records and contacts. I would say it was a model of cooperation. And to respond in part to Mr. Rogers' question, do we exercise together? We train together all the time, particularly in the active shooter realm, because it's the emerging threat with our federal partners, but we work together every day. We eat together, we drink together. We don't sleep together yet, but that's just because we don't sleep much.
Well, thank you. And as I yield back, Chief Azevedo, thank you for acknowledging the hard work that Mr. Donovan and I have done in interoperability and communications for all of your departments. And I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, the four of y'all are in law enforcement. Do y'all carry firearms? Not in here, but do you carry a firearm daily? I think I'm getting a head shake yes from everyone. There wasn't a hand raise or a...
I do on duty. A lot of times I don't off duty.
Okay, thank you. The ranking member injected gun control into this because that is the narrative of the left. And for the record, he's an avid participant in the shooting sports. He's actually a great shot. I've shot competitively against him. And so he exercises Second Amendment rights. We're here in these ivory towers of government protected by law enforcement. There's a guy outside the door in a uniform of the Capitol Police with a firearm to protect us. If more gun laws were the answer, more restrictive gun laws that are affecting the Second Amendment rights of Americans, the south side of Chicago would be the safest place on earth. You could leave your doors open, you could walk the streets at night, and you could allow your children to play in the front yard, but yet that's not the case. More gun laws are not the answer. There are 357 million Americans, or 357 million firearms in America in the hands of law-abiding citizens. The problem we need to look at, and let me tell you about the law-abiding citizens. When seconds count, the police are just minutes away. And they have the ability to draw a firearm to protect themselves, their families, their property, their neighbors, their constitution if necessary. So we've had gun control injected into this debate. But let me tell you that I think the problem is gun-free zones, because we're restricting where law-abiding citizens can carry firearms. Gun-free zones, San Bernardino, federal, state property prohibited from having a firearm. No one in that room could protect themselves. Orlando was a bar. Nobody could carry a firearm in there. Charleston, South Carolina, mass shooter, gun-free zone. Columbine, Sandy Hook, they were all gun-free zones. No one had access to a firearm, so we were counting on law enforcement to be there. Law enforcement can't be everywhere, nor would we want you to be there. So the Second Amendment is there for us to protect ourselves and our family. So we've had the no-fly list injected into this. There are 200,000 people on the no-fly list, 80% of which are foreign nationals. So the other 20% are United States citizens. We can look hard at them. But when you think about the no-fly list, how in the world do you get on the no-fly list, and how in the world do you get off the no-fly list? Where's the due process afforded Americans under the Fifth and Sixth Amendment to know what your accusation is, what the charges are, who's accusing you, have a chance to interview witnesses, have a chance to defend yourself, and get off that? But too many Americans are on the no-fly list, and they don't even know it until they go try to fly somewhere. That's Fifth and Sixth Amendment due process rights that are guaranteed us. So we're relying on big government to actually take care of us, to find these terrorists. Well, guess what? They missed it, America. They missed it in Orlando. That guy was suspected of terrorism. They missed it in New Jersey. Dad said, I think my son's involved in terrorism. FBI investigated him for 2 months and said, oh, your son's not involved in terrorism. Dad said yesterday, hello. They missed it in Fort Hood. He had Soldier of Allah on his business card. There were signs and signals for Major Hassan all over. Missed it in San Bernardino because the wife was actually, there was a lot of questions about how she even came into this country. They missed it in Boston. The FBI was informed by Russia, for all intents and purposes, that somebody had been traveling over there and possibly been in contact with terrorist organizations and may have got some training, missed it. And we had loss of lives. What we continue to do is talk about gun control debate when we need to talk about the Second Amendment, the constitutional rights, the Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights to due process, but yet we'll continue to allow unfettered immigration from unvettable countries. They just granted citizenship to 858 individuals who were ordered, deported, or removed under another identity when during the naturalization process their digital fingerprint records weren't available. We just gave them citizenship. We cannot rely on the federal government and this big bureaucracy to continue to try to keep us safe. We've got to revert back, I believe, to the individuals, the law-abiding citizens in this country. We've got to look at the gun laws that are out there now that prohibit law-abiding citizens from being able to carry firearms in areas where they could protect themselves. We need to allow school marshals and some sort of program in schools that are now gun-free zones so somebody in that school will have access to a firearm to protect our children. You know, we'll continue to allow terrorists to come in here. We'll continue to attack the constitutional rights of Americans. We'll continue to have restrictive gun control laws in the state and an effort in the country. If you look at Mr. Higgins' statistics and you take out suicides, the number goes way down. You take out criminal violence related to drugs, that number goes way down. But yet, we'll continue to have this debate. We'll continue to have a sit-in on the halls of the floor of Congress to shut down the process over this issue. We'll continue to invite somebody who made something look like a bomb, brought it to school, but now it's a clock. And we invite him into the White House. The good thing the guy in New Jersey didn't say, oh, that's just a clock. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate this hearing, but we've gotten off track from the get-go talking about violating the Second Amendment rights of Americans. When we won't have a real conversation about the gun-free zones, the people that are on the terrorist watch list and how they get off, the no-fly list and how that might be used. I got a novel idea. If you're on the no-fly list and you're a foreign national, 80% are, goodbye. No-fly, goodbye. Let's get them out of the country. They're identified as terrorists, they're foreign nationals. Why are we keeping them in this country? But I don't think a single person on the terrorist watch list or the no-fly list committed any of these acts of terror that we're talking about. If I'm wrong, correct me. Gentlemen, I'm going to look at you right now, and I'm going to thank you for what you do to keep our citizens safe. Law enforcement in this country is under attack, but we've got your back, as the chairman said. We appreciate the men and women in blue that are walking that thin blue line. Thank you for what you do. It's not an easy job. People in the 3rd Congressional District of South Carolina appreciate what you do. God bless you, and I'll yield back.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Richmond from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just start with the people make the assertion all the time that more guns are the answer. Guns in schools, guns in churches, guns in movie theaters. We have armed guards in banks, and banks get robbed every day, and people get killed in banks every day. So to the extent that people think that's the solution, I think you're dead wrong. But as we talk about law enforcement, we talk about having your back. Let me tell you what having your back means. We had a committee meeting about combating terrorist recruitment and about dispelling the propaganda that comes from ISIS or ISIL. And I simply wanted an amendment that said, why don't we target sovereign citizens? And they shot me down. Well, let me tell you what sovereign citizens did in the meantime. They shot down 3 officers in Baton Rouge, injured another couple. So when we start talking about having your back, it's making sure that we have the intelligence and we focus on everything. We're smart enough to do 2 and 3 things at one time. That is to combat lone actors, to combat terrorism, to infiltrate cells and track them. But it's also to see what is the real threat to your officers and deputies on the street. And if you want to talk about your officers and your deputies, you have to talk about sovereign citizen that's killed more police officers than anybody else. But this committee doesn't want to talk about it. In fact, this committee went out of its way to ignore the issue. And let me just tell you about Baton Rouge as we talk about having our law enforcement back. You had one actor, one sick individual with a long gun. He was better armed than the police officers that responded because his long gun, the bullets would go through our police officer's vest. And our police officer who responded with pistols that wouldn't go through his vest. So the question becomes, are we funding our police departments like we should? Are we making an investment in our law enforcement in an extent to help them protect lives? So as we do this today, and you still have to talk about the Department of Homeland Security in this committee, combine it with judiciary. We had two unfortunate incidents this week where, again, an African-American male was killed in an incident involving law enforcement. But we spend more time talking about whether Colin Kaepernick is standing for the national anthem. But we don't want to talk about why he's kneeling. So in this committee, we're having this hearing, which is not a new hearing. We have it all the time. In judiciary, the other committee with jurisdiction over something like this, we're talking about impeaching the IRS director. At some point, we have to be bigger than this. And we have to be focused on issues that we see. And no one is diminishing terrorist attacks, because I think there's one common goal between everybody, and that's to figure out a way to stop them. But when you start titling our hearing with stopping the next attack, how do we keep our cities from becoming the battleground? Duh, wake up. It's been the battleground. It's a battleground on a number of fronts. But if we're going to truly talk about how we fix it, we're going to have to put the resources so that we can share intelligence. We can arm our law enforcement. We have to make sure we have the capabilities to stop an attack before it happens. But we also have to realize the magnitude of the incident gets exaggerated if the person has an assault weapon. So I will ask one question, and whoever wants to answer it, please have at it. The attack in Minnesota, where 10 people were injured, tell me what that looks like if instead of a knife, he has an AK-47 or AR-15 with a high-capacity magazine. Does anyone want to?
It looks like a lot of dead Americans that were simply shopping. And I won't even respond to Mr. Duncan because I don't think it needs to be responded here today. And out of respect to this office and this institution, I'll just take the fifth.
Well,
leave it at that.
Let me just ask this last question. Do sovereign citizens pose a real threat to your officers that answer traffic stops, serve subpoenas, and just walk around every day?
I believe sovereign citizens pose one of the most significant threats to civilian law enforcement today. A couple of years ago, I had one of my sergeants shot. He survived, but shot by an individual who fancied himself as a sovereign. Many of these incidents that you have referred to, in which there were lone gunmen, if you delve into their background, you'll see that perhaps they too subscribe to the sovereign ideology.
If no one else wants to answer, I'll yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Ms. McSally from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you are doing your jobs and outreach and trying to address this new threat that's metastasizing, and we have individuals being radicalized on the internet to take action into their own hands, one of the things I'd like to focus on is specifically the phenomena of girls and women becoming radicalized, becoming jihadists, trying to travel to Iraq and Syria. I held a roundtable with my colleague Kathleen Rice on this phenomena months ago because there's a very specific dynamic going on here that we haven't seen before, where we have girls and women not just being victimized and recruited, but also being hardened jihadists themselves and actually leading some of those efforts. Just for some numbers, of the 250 Americans who have attempted to go to Syria, 1 in 6 are women. Almost a fifth of them are teenagers, but more than a third of the teenagers are girls. So we're seeing this new phenomenon. We've seen some cases in the media, 3 teenage girls from Colorado who were intercepted in Germany trying to travel over there, a 19-year-old from Minnesota who we found when she was in Syria. a Mississippi former cheerleader honor student whose father is a police officer and a Navy veteran, trying to plot to head over to Syria with her fiance. This is a new phenomena. And so do your outreach efforts in your communities have anything focusing specifically on women and girls that are becoming radicalized, or are they just part of the general efforts for outreach? Any of you would like to answer?
We've watched this very closely, certainly mindful of the number of travelers we've seen. As you see from the propaganda videos we've kind of collected and put together for the chairman, they're very sophisticated in their pitches and their outreach. You can't ignore the San Bernardino case as an example of radicalization targeting females in the United States. We also have an active prosecution now involving 2 women in New York City who were planning to use pressure cooker bombs to launch a plot that we interdicted last year in a year-and-a-half-long undercover operation. So this is something we're very concerned with, and part of our discussion with the community, while we kind of struggle with them to come up with what is the counter-narrative and who can deliver it.
Right. Anyone else want to?
In Austin, Texas, a couple of years ago, we actually had a family, husband, wife, and children with the JTTF arrested at the Houston International on their way to Syria through Turkey. And so for us, the key is not specifically addressing women, but addressing young people through educational programs, through economic opportunities. I don't think you see too often people that are educated wanting to blow themselves up. That is the exception, not the rule. And so youth programs and educational and economic opportunities is one of the things that we do.
Right. And what we learned, though, is ISIS is using a very specific and different message to recruit girls and women. Sheriff Bashar, do you have something to share?
You're correct, and that's clearly a concern on many levels because it brings in a whole demographic that typically is less likely to be as scrutinized because so many of the bombers or terrorists in the past have been fighting-age males. I worked on a case study in a Middle East suicide bomber attempt of a female, and as they broke it down, they actually analyzed the psychological reasons why she was put into that position and thought it was her only thing that she could do to I guess, feel better about herself. And so the disaffected and those that are vulnerable to a message of this is a higher purpose and you'll be valued if you do this are the ones generically I think that we need to have more outreach and more connectivity to look to interdict that message and bring them away from that siren call, if you will.
Great, thank you. My second question is about, Sheriff Bashard, you mentioned you don't have real-time information sharing. This is a real concern to me. We've broken down some stovepipes since 9/11 across the federal agencies. We've done some work between federal, state, and local, but I think we have a long way to go. Fusion centers are an important part of that, but some fusion centers are not as good as others, and it comes down to relationship. I actually had a bill, H.R. 3503, to address improving our fusion centers and giving higher access to security clearances to you all and your teammates so that you have better information out on the front lines. It was passed unanimously in the House, being held up in the Senate right now. But if you were in charge, what would you do to, and I only have a little bit of time, Sheriff Richard, break down those stovepipes. Some of it's policy, some of it's clearances, some of it's equipment, but what would you do in order to make sure you have all the information that you need?
Well, I think you touched on a lot of the important issues as it relates to how we better communicate, but it gets back to, you know, the methodology sometimes in an urgent situation. As I mentioned, I have a top secret clearance, but I don't have an instantaneous ability to receive information without actually physically bringing us together. And in this day, in terms of the technology that's available and we see used by terrorists, it's a bit frustrating to literally have to drive someplace to get, you know, actionable information.
Yeah, that's insane, and we need to work on that together, and I know I am out of time. Does anyone else have anything to say on that issue, and we can follow up?
Yes, ma'am. I think it's really important that police chiefs have gone through a background investigation, presumably, have been licensed peace officers. They're known entities. I don't think we're any threat to our nation. And sadly, the majority of police chiefs in this country do not have a top secret clearance. Right. And I think one of the things that we need to look at is if there's an investigation or an issue in an area of responsibility for a police chief, we need to look at it, how we can provide that information for that person who ultimately is responsible for the safety of that community outside of the clearance process. And so that's just food for thought, because the truth of the matter is a lot of police chiefs are in the dark about investigations in their area of responsibility.
That's something we definitely need to improve, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
Hey, if I could, a quick follow-up. I know in Boston, the Boston Police Commissioner told me that he could not even talk to his 4 police officers on the Joint Terrorism Task Force about the investigations. We have made efforts to change that. There's been talk of an MOU to change that. Chief, has that changed?
I don't have a TS clearance, and so I will just say this, that I'm still the police chief in Austin, Texas, and whether my people work for the JTTF or not, they work for the people of Austin. And my direction to them is that the day that they don't tell me something that we needed to know, they don't work for the federal government, they work for Austin, and they're withholding information at their own peril. Fortunately, we have a pretty good relationship with our local SAC, but it still is an issue, and I think the answer is that we not only have a right to know, we have a need to know, regardless of the clearance level of that investigation, for our areas of responsibility.
And I couldn't agree more. I mean, Commissioner Miller's at the state of play in New York?
In New York, we don't have those issues. I think it's part because with over 100 detectives on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, there's very little information that we're not either handling ourselves or have access to. However, understanding the discussion that occurred after Boston, Major City Chiefs, Intelligence Commanders Committee, Chuck DeWitt worked together with partners to redraw, Mr. Chairman, the MOU about how a Joint Terrorism Task Force operates with its local partners in terms of access they're entitled to, clearance levels, computer access, and so on. And that new MOU, I believe, is in effect now. So that should bring improvement to the situation, and I think we can count on Major City Chiefs to kind of anecdotally check on that to make sure it's being enforced.
Yeah, and let me just pledge my support to help you. I have talked to the FBI about this MOU. I know it's gone back and forth, but it just seems to me any commissioner or police chief that has officers on the task force should, at least the chief should be briefed on those cases. And you have the street intel. You have the intelligence on the streets. Chair now recognizes Mrs. Watson-Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To each of you, let me just say that I'm profoundly grateful, because I can just listen to all the challenges that you're experiencing on so many different levels from so many different areas, and how safe we are, relatively speaking. And I know it is because you all are dedicated. You interact with your colleagues wherever you need to, and you're smart at what you do, and you're keeping us safe. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also want to recognize that the great state of New Jersey and the Linden Police Department was very helpful in addressing the situation that we encountered this weekend working with New York. Sometimes my wonderful state gets overlooked, Mr. Chairman, and we're small, but we're mighty. The other thing I'd just like to say, two things quickly, and I have one question. Number one is that I can't hardly believe that more guns anywhere should be the answer to a safer community or society, school, or any other place. That's just an absolute ludicrous thought on anybody's part. And number two is I think that you all have expressed in some way, shape, or form that the proliferation of illegal guns in the communities are harmful not only to the community, but even to your law enforcement, and that is not the direction in which we should continue to go. Following up on that, I wanted to highlight something with you, Chief Acevedo. See? In today's testimony and at a meeting with the Homeland Security Advisory Subcommittee, you stated that right-wing extremism is as much of a threat as the threat inspired by foreign terrorist organizations. In fact, I have an article that goes back, I guess, to 2014, in which you express that as it relates to someone who was part of an association, a self-defined associate of some priesthood, some Phineas
priesthood.
priesthood. Do you still believe that that is one of our greatest threats coming from right-wing extremism? And also, do you recognize and feel that extremism, even on the left, is as much of a great threat? May I have your comments on that?
Thank you, and absolutely. I get beat up in my great state because anytime you mention right-wing anything, you get beat up. But extremism, whether it's left or right, is just that, extremists. The sovereign citizen movement in this nation is alive and well. If you look across the landscape, you will see police officers that have been shot and killed by members of this movement. And the only reason I mention that in the Homeland Security Advisory Council to the Secretary and to this body is that we don't want to be myopic as we look at the threat picture and the threat domain around our country. It is not just from foreign extremists. It is alive and well in our own nation, and if you look at the totality of the victims of the threat, those right-wing extremists really do, just like left-wing extremists with bombs in the 70s and so forth, do pose a significant threat.
So I believe that this committee has certainly given the attention to the foreign extremists. I'm wondering if, from your vantage points, are there sufficient resources available to you in support, even in grants and other funding, that help you with identifying those threats that are posed by extremists who are not foreign-born extremists? And if you would all just give me yes, no, and what you'd like to offer, because I only have a few minutes, I would appreciate that also. Starting with you, Mr. Miller. And
the grants make no distinction as to domestic terrorism versus foreign, so they can be applied equally. So it's not an issue for us.
For us, funding continues to be an issue. We were a UASI city that lost its funding, and any funding that we can get. I mean, we're down to a third. Unfortunately, we know that there are a lot of competing interests and a lot that you all have to fund, but we need help. And the militia movement and the sovereign citizen movement is alive and well in our nation, and it is I think it's an absolute threat to the safety of our communities.
As the Commissioner said, the grants and the training relates to any kind of threat. All threats, all hazards was actually some of the verbiage we worked on many years ago, so we apply that standard when we do our training.
Funding remains an issue for us as well. I believe that it is absolutely pivotal that we continue to work across the silos, if you will, to get information. So I'm looking forward to it. And again, in our community, we had a homegrown violent extremist who attacked the nightclub there in Orlando.
Thank you. As I close, it is good to know that we could use these resources on any of the areas that we've talked about. I guess the question then becomes where there is no problem because you can, is it applied appropriately? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Carter from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Obviously, this is extremely important, and the work that you do is extremely important. And I want to preface my remarks, my questions, by saying I'm not trying to be adversarial or ask you to be adversarial. I'm just trying to get to the root of the problem or just to improve things. Maybe there's not really a problem, but how can we improve things? I'd like to start with you, Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, I can only imagine in being in the high-threat environment that New York City is, that you probably deal with a greater number of threats than we truly realize. And I suspect that's the case. And my question to you is this, and it's about communication. We all understand how incredibly important it is, particularly in this area, particularly between the federal authorities and the local authorities. And I just want to ask you, has the Department of Homeland Security supported your mission? Have they done that, and especially in regards to emergency communications?
So the Department of Homeland Security, particularly under Secretary Johnson, has been the most accessible Department of Homeland Security I've known since 9/11, having done this job in both Los Angeles, when Art was in California, and New York City. So that's in terms of our ability to work with DHS. If we ask them for something, they work hard to get it for us. When you refer to communications, are you talking about the passing of information, or are you talking about actual interoperability?
I'm talking about everything.
We get a steady stream of products from DHS, and I am fortunate enough, and it may be because of the size and scope of New York, to have 2 DHS intelligence advisors assigned to the NYPD to make sure that that feed and flow is early and often.
Okay, well, let me put it this way. How can we improve it? I'm always, telling my staff, we got to get better, we got to get better. How can we make it better?
I'm unfortunately a satisfied customer. I
Okay.
got nothing.
Fair enough.
I'm in from that department on that issue.
Fair enough.
I'll talk about money till the cows come home, but on that issue, I'm good.
And look, I understand that, and I understand it takes money, but it also takes implementation, it takes communication, it takes so much more, and that's what I'm trying to get to here, is the communication factor.
I would suggest one answer to that question, which is Heather Fong, who is the Assistant Secretary for Law Enforcement, was a police chief. She understands what we need, she understands how we need it, she understands what we need it for. The history of that position before Heather and Louis Quijas had been a long line of people who did not come from law enforcement, assorted generals and military people and other appointees.
Okay.
I would urge in the future that for the sake of communications, that person always be a law enforcement.
All right, good. I think that makes perfect sense. Chief Acevedo, I'm sorry, whatever. It's just not a popular name in South Georgia. I apologize. Nevertheless, Chief of the Austin, Texas Police Department, over 2,500 law enforcement officers and personnel to protect your city. Have you ever worked with the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center? Are you familiar with FLETC's?
Yes, sir. I've actually worked there, and I've actually instructed there. It's a great facility, and I think they offer a lot of support to state, county, and local law enforcement. Yes, I have.
Have any of the others had any experience with any of the federal law enforcement training centers? We've got one in our district, in the 1st Congressional District in Glencoe, Georgia, and we're very proud. I've toured it, I've seen it, and I've seen the work that they do. It is a great facility, a great opportunity to utilize a resource, and I'm just wondering if you've had that experience.
We have had the experience, and I've completed training there as well as members of my staff. But going back to your question about DHS and perhaps what can be done, the metropolitan Orlando area, when we were on the list to receive UASC funding, we did so when the Secretary had the discretion to select different metropolitan areas to receive funding. That he no longer has that discretion, is rank ordered, and perhaps it would be good for the Secretary to have some discretion, particularly when you have an incident like what we had when we're 34th on the list and only the top 29 receive funding. If the Secretary has some discretion there to fund different regions based on what has occurred most recently, I think that would assist in many ways. We are similarly situated as Austin in that we once received funding and then it was discontinued.
Right. Well, again, let me. Yes, is it okay, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, I would like to also thank you for the question. Obviously, we've heard a bit about the real-time communications. In New York, it's probably a little bit different because they're co-located. Even though we're part of Fusion Center and I have people assigned there, it's not co-located with my headquarters. Therefore, the real-time communication gap necessitating a drive. But there's other kinds of communication information that does not and has not for years taken place that Sheriff Demings mentioned about information coming to the deputy on the street that stops somebody. That's an officer safety issue. Even if we're not empowered and we're not asking to be empowered to be in charge of deportation, we should be empowered with information so that that deputy knows that that person may be an additional threat to him or her on the side of a dark road for reasons that they don't even know, and it goes deeper than that. I've been bringing this same topic up for over a decade. When somebody gets booked into our jails, sheriffs nationwide run the jails, we don't get real-time information in most of those facilities, the status of anybody or information as it relates to even criminality being illegal in this country. And when it comes to reimbursement for someone that is and comes from the federal government, it's still a phone call to find out, unless you're participating in certain programs, a phone call to find out if anybody is eligible for reimbursement, but they won't even tell you who.
That's great.
That
Listen,
disjointed.
thank you for your answers. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. That's exactly the kind of things we need to be working on and to get better. We always want to get better. Thank you for what you do. It's extremely important. We want to help. That's why we had this hearing today, is to find out what you've just described to us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you indulging.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California who represents San Bernardino, Ms. Torres.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for working so hard and diligently to keep our community safe. I know that your job is not easy, and I know that you are, there are critics of the work that you do every single day, but we do appreciate everything that you do. For Deputy Commissioner Miller, you talked about data from 911 systems in New York and how that is part of the intelligence that you have on potential terrorists, members of the community. Can you explain what that entails and how is that data collected? Does it come through the 911 system? 911 dispatchers are also a part of that communication system. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that process works?
So in the NYPD, like most police departments, the 911 system feeds into a computer-assisted dispatch system where calls are summarized on a keyboard as they come in and sent to computers in police cars over the police radios and now to these handheld devices. As the calls come in and the call takers take them, they can stack up in a dispatcher's queue as they're received, whereas where the officers are receiving them directly, they're going direct to this device even before they come over the radio. It's reduced our response time by a full minute and change in certain areas of the city. That's one element. The second element is the ability to harness the power of this data as it's correlated, which is you get a 911 call of an assault in progress in an apartment, possible domestic violence. When you look at the call on the phone, instead of just what you get over the police radio, it'll tell you who called, what is the callback number. If you touch that callback number, you get
Critical
the complainant on the phone.
information about the location and who may live there, if it's a targeted member or someone that has been identified?
Yeah, it's more about that information than terrorist intelligence. It's a daily tool the police can use. However, in the throes of a terrorist incident, it can become vital because now you can push information instantly and pictures and videos to the police.
How are your 911 dispatchers trained to pull this information out of your callers during the interview process?
They go through their PCTs, police communications technicians. They go through an extensive training process of their own and an extensive vetting process in being hired about working under pressure, being able to multitask, and so on.
And being able to interview potential suspects and potential victims of crime, nosy neighbors that may have intelligence on what is happening next door, someone who may be potentially targeting their neighborhood, correct?
I think an example is when we were looking for the suspect in this latest bombing on the floor of the 911 center. Every operator who was working that day was told, we're going out with this picture. You can expect a lot of potential sightings to come in. When you get those calls, ask where is the person, what are they wearing right now, are they carrying any packages, parcels, backpacks, bags, that kind of thing, and to keep that caller on the line until you had the rest of the information, and then to transfer them to the intelligence operations desk so my detectives could get more.
Thank you so much. The reason why I'm asking you this, if you don't know, there has been a push to reclassify 911 dispatchers by the Office of Management and budget. And I think it's a very short-sighted decision, not understanding that this is a critical position for first responders. And as a former 911 dispatcher, this is a very important issue to me.
The 911 operator, dispatcher, call taker is the very first line. It's the person who gets the call for help first.
So now let's talk about the radio system. I'm very concerned about the San Bernardino incident. As officers are responding and as the dispatchers are giving them directions on which way to travel and suspect information, there was no way for them to switch to an encrypted radio channel. This is really important because the suspects, had there been more than 2 people involved, they could have positioned themselves in a place to target the officers as they're responding. What do you think that we need to do in that, from that perspective?
Well, we're very fortunate in our region is that our interoperability is absolutely where it needs to be, and we have the ability to move to a unified encrypted channel in Central Texas. As a matter of fact, with our F1 Formula One event in November, DHS is going to come out and look at our interoperability. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of jurisdictions don't have that capability, and something that needs to be worked on.
They don't have that capability, and there's not enough funding for them to be able to purchase radios and the systems that they need. I've exceeded my time. Thank you. Yield back.
Chair now recognizes a gentleman from New York, Mr. Katko.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, you may not remember this, but I had the pleasure of attending a briefing with Chairman McCall and Mr. King about a year ago in New York with you and the chief and some others, and I was thoroughly impressed by the professionalism and the ability to get the job done, and I just want to commend you for that. And one of my colleagues on the other side had mentioned that you don't often get credit for what you stop, but I can assure you that were it not for your great leadership, that there'd be much more problems in New York City. So I really applaud your efforts, and I hope they continue. One of the things I'd like to explore, and one of the things I think this committee is uniquely positioned to help you all with, is something I hear again and again, and that's the lack of information sharing and the lack of breaking down the lines of communications on this federal, state, and local level. I've had a bird's eye view of this for 20 years as a federal organized crime prosecutor, first in El Paso, then in Puerto Rico, and then in New York State and Syracuse area. So everywhere you went, the biggest problems was getting the team to work together and breaking down those barriers. And now it seems like in New York, necessity is the mother of invention. And you have to break down those barriers. You have to get working seamlessly. That's the only way you're going to even remotely be able to do your job. So I'd like to have kind of examine what Mr. Miller's situation is, with really is the exception to the rule, because everywhere else I understand is quite different. And Mr. Demings, I think you mentioned that you've got to improve our analytical capabilities, and you also mentioned that there's some barriers with you getting access to ICE databases, for example. And those are the types of things I'm concerned with, I want to hear about. So perhaps if you could tell me, Mr. Demings, Mr. Bouchard, and Mr. Acevedo, what is the biggest problems that you see with respect to the information sharing? One of the things I see is first and foremost, is how long it takes to get a background check done for someone joining the task force, which is maddening, and that's got to get changed. But what else do you see that we can help work on? And then perhaps we at the end have Mr. Miller comment on ways in which we could fix it. The MOU system seems to be one of them. Maybe using the model that New York is trying to implement nationwide might be something we can help for us. But I'd like to hear from Mr. Demings first, if I may.
Well, I will say that we enjoy a pretty good relationship with our federal authorities there in the metropolitan Orlando area because of what we have there in terms of the theme parks. We have federal agents who are embedded within our theme parks, and so that forces us to communicate. I do believe that there's still room for improvement, however. The situation I talked about earlier, in which a law enforcement officer stops someone on the streets of our nation when they do typically we're trained to check for, run a national check to see if the person has any type of warrants or what have you, and we run it within our respective states as well. But there's nothing that comes back from that national database that tells us whether or not that person that we have encountered is illegal or not. And that's something that we have suggested. It's a policy within ICE that perhaps that needs to change, where we want to have access to that type of real-time information.
That's something we can definitely take a look at. My staff, I hope, is taking notes. Yes, they are. Good. All right, go ahead.
I would dovetail on that, and I've asked this same question when we've had meetings with senior leadership with the major county sheriffs. Is it a policy issue, is it a funding issue, or is it a communication technology issue that the different systems don't communicate and integrate well? And for years we've been getting, well, it could be part of all three. So we've been asking these same questions for literally a decade at this point. And again, you know, some folks have said, well, we don't want you to have that information about status or immigration because it allows you to profile. Understand the only time that database is queried is when we've already stopped an individual. And even worse, when they're already in our jail and we're still not told. So, you know, we think it's long overdue that we at least have access to the information for situational awareness and for an understanding of who we have and who is in our jail, and that's not there.
Mr. Acevedo?
I'm going to take it from the Criminal Intelligence Enterprise for the Major City Chiefs, Major County Sheriffs. We've been working with DHS now. I've been on that body for 9 years trying to get this enterprise up and running. It's still not where it needs to be. And quite frankly, we need support for our intelligence commanders groups. That's 68 intelligence commanders throughout the nation. Each one of those organizations, and that's just the major city chiefs, and then we have how many members from the Sheriff's Department. We desperately need funding to support at least 2 meetings a year with these commanders because relationships matter. And we all know that that needle in the haystack we're looking for is more than likely going to be found by a state or local or county law enforcement official, and if we don't support our intelligence groups so they can build those relationships, share the information, and the intelligence enterprise that's still not where it needs to be, and support that enterprise to continue the build out, we were just whispering to each other, we're going to be dead at the rate we're going. And I don't mean by a terrorist attack, I think of old age. So we want to put that on your radar, the CIE in the Intelligence Commanders Group, and finding funding. You know, $2 million seems like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, that's a drop in the bucket. DHS has the funding, but we need you all to, yourselves or an appropriations committee, to actually order them to peel off that money so we can, at the state, county, and local level, do what we need to do to keep our community safe.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, now you have a much different posture than your colleagues at the table. And it's because of, I think, the fact that ground zero really is New York City for the terrorist targets. And that helps break down some of the barriers. But can you share with us some of the ways in which you've been able to effectively share information with the local agencies that, that other jurisdictions may struggle in doing?
We engage in extensive liaison efforts, some programmatic, but as Chief Acevedo said, a lot of this is people-to-people and networking. First, we have the SHIELD program, which has thousands of members, and it's our outreach to the private security. It's the public-private partnership where we provide them regular briefing materials, constant alerts on breaking events, and training. Second, we have a Sentry program. That is not on the counterterrorism side, but on the intelligence side, where we have developed a network of partnerships in the surrounding areas, from New Jersey to Nassau, Suffolk County, upstate, as far as Boston, a virtual northeast corridor of law enforcement partners who we bring together at a major conference once a year and go through a series of presentations and information sharing exercises. But we also communicate with regularly. When something happens somewhere, we pick up the phone, we'll call that place, we have a point of contact. Same thing in reverse when something happens here. And both of those are based on email platforms, cross communications, and information that we send out.
Thank you very much. And before I conclude, Mr. Chairman, I just want to note for the record that I did not engage in the gun debate during my questioning.
We thank you for that. I think the title of the hearing was the threat that we face post 9/11. So, Chair recognizes Ms. Jackson Lee from Houston, Texas.
Thank you very much. Again, let us acknowledge the work of all of you as first responders. Some of you have had the privilege and opportunity to meet, and maybe thank you personally for your work. Let me put on the record that the United States, DHS, for example, has 240,000 employees that have a range of responsibilities from aviation to border security. I believe there are 1 million firefighters, 750,000 are volunteers, and 18,000 police departments, 556,000 full-time employees. To Chief Acevedo, let me thank you personally. We know the great work that you're doing in the state, and I want to commend to the major chiefs the legislation that we submitted to a number of individuals called the Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. That's just a little note for myself for you to look at it, dealing with police community relations, and even that has something to do with us working together. Let me also say that I think the record deserves a clarification on the little 12-year-old in northern Texas, if you will. That 12-year-old had a clock. And I think what is important in order for us to embrace all of those who are going to help us solve this problem, we must understand where to direct our anger and questions. I want to say to the educators who saw something and said something, that is what we say in the Department of Homeland Security. But what we also want to have occur is that you balance it against the knowledge that you may have as to the individual, the family, or in this instance, a 12-year-old child. So if you knew that you had a bright 12-year-old child, you could have asked that child, what is that? And also see something and say something. That's how we really solve problems. I'd like to also add into the record the Sikh man who found bombing suspect. I did what every American would have to do. It's a Sikh, obviously, a faith that many Americans have, and could have just as well been in Oakland, Michigan, a Muslim. Could have been a store owner and did that. So I have unanimous consent to put this into the record.
Without objection, so would the gentlelady yield? Chairman or Commissioner Miller has a meeting with the Department of Homeland Security and has to.
Can I talk quickly and get a question out to him?
Well, if you have a very quick question for him.
Yeah, before he departs.
Because he has to depart.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. The Department of Homeland Security is important, but let me quickly say that my focus on the questioning after you leave is on intelligence. So my point to you is, give us the level of cruciality that good intelligence is, coming from civilians, coming from the Muslim community, coming from neighbors, and as well coming from fusion centers or infusion centers, and of course JTTF, which is an investigatory arm. Level, the height, what level do you put the right intelligence at?
I put it at the top because having the right intelligence, the right partnerships, the right sources is the difference between having prevented 20 attacks or having had 20 attacks.
I congratulate you on that, and I will pursue my other line of questioning with the other gentlemen. Please let me put on the record my appreciation for the service of Commissioner Bratton, who I know you had the privilege of working under and we worked with, and thank you very much for your service. Let me go to Chief Acevedo and all the other chiefs that are here. Thank you. My focus is to get you the money, that you need and that you've come here using your time to come up and explain to us what we need, not to look backwards, but to look forward. So first, Chief, tell me how effective the Fusion Center is in the state of Texas. Chief Acevedo, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Thank you for that question, and great to see you. Our Fusion Center is absolutely key. Prior to the Fusion Center in the Austin Regional Intelligence Center, we really didn't have a mechanism by which, when we spotted threats or we saw something going on, to quickly act on it. And I can tell you, just last weekend, a former member of Congress received a threat. And we were able to very quickly track that down because of our Fusion Center. And then we were smart enough to leverage our relationship with the state of Texas and the Department of Public Safety, where we've actually placed our Fusion Center at DPS headquarters and pay them $1 a year for the next 10 years, thank goodness. And as a result, we've been able to leverage the relationship, the assets, and although we don't get USC funding, when we received that funding back, I believe in 2008, we entered it knowing that we as a community and as a region were going to commit and committed to maintaining that fusion center, and we're doing so at a great cost locally because it's that important to us in our community.
Let me ask Mr. Bouchard and Mr. Demings the same question, and do we need more resources for the Fusion Center? Fusion centers, because Michigan and Florida.
Thank you, ma'am. Yes, I think nationwide the fusion centers are in need of resources because while all this has been going on, certainly the country has gone through a recession, and that affected all the police agencies in terms of their budgets and their personnel. I cut 165 positions during the downturn, which I still don't have back, and yet, you know, I want to have a commitment to the Fusion Center, but I have to fund 100% of it. So I have to pull someone out of our budget and out of our deployment and put them into the Fusion Center. And certainly would be helpful if there was a way to, on a combined platform, if they're going to be assigned basically to a federal joint terrorism or joint effort, that there should be some funding stream. We believe it would be helpful
I agree, Chief.
add to the interaction and grow that. Because a lot of agencies can't afford it, and even I, you know, find it challenging because we're asked to be on the JTTF, we're asked to be on identity theft with the Secret Service, we're asked to be on the fugitive with the U.S. Marshals, we're asked to be on all these different things.
Allow me to get Mr. Demings. Thank you. I support you in that. Mr. Demings, my sympathy to you for what your community experienced, your experience, and what you need in a fusion center to gather the intelligence that you need.
The Fusion Centers, again, they play a very pivotal role in our state and really as it relates to national security. Last year we had 66.1 million visitors who came to Orange County, where I'm from, and that was #1 in the nation. But with our Fusion Centers, while the primary focus is on counterterrorism efforts, it also has assisted in allowing us to manage natural disasters and also all crimes. And so it is pivotal to preventing terror attacks, but also preventing crimes from occurring in our community as well.
Mr. Chairman, I have one last question, and
It's a brief one, I hope.
Yes, it is. Thank
Okay,
you,
thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman. First of all, I'll just make this statement. I do think getting guns off the street would help all of you, including officers, as we move toward dealing with this question of police-community relations. But I offer a note about many of us who have a bill to close the gun show loophole, and I have one that indicates to report anytime guns are sold and you don't have the background check completed. And then also, I think it's important to take note of the fact that we need to report when guns are transferred without that background check done. Guns do kill. Let me ask this last question as how you draw your information. That's how we keep these dangerous issues from happening. Tell me how valuable it is to have relationships with diverse communities, diverse faiths. And obviously I'm going to say Muslims, but a variety of people. And if you talk about right-wing attacks, how valuable it is to have information for you to do your job and have people willing to talk to you to do your job.
I indicated earlier that we had 66.1 million visitors. Well, they come from everywhere, so it is absolutely important for us to have relationships in the broad, diverse communities that we have, and so we really focus on that. Before an incident occurs, we try to have established relationships, and we're depending on those relationships to provide the information in advance to us to perhaps assist in preventing an attack.
Thank you. Mr. Bouchard, and then Mr. Acevedo. Thank you.
Thank you. I think relationships are key on many levels, whether it's, when we talked all threats, all hazards, whether it's traditional crime or counterterrorism, you have to have relationships so people feel comfortable to call and tell you they see something odd, maybe it's related to terrorism or maybe it's a drug house. They have to have that confidence in that relationship. You know, everyone's got their own kinds of platforms, I think, to try to do that. I launched a thing called the Sheriff's Relations Team, SRT, and we try to put together community members to be a funnel, because sometimes people don't feel comfortable calling the police, but they may feel comfortable calling people that are on that team that can then connect to us, and also create platforms that allow anonymous information to flow to us in an uninhibited manner.
Thank you, Chief.
And relationships absolutely are key, and whether it's, and I spoke to this earlier, Congresswoman, is whether it's the immigration debate or whatever debate, we have to stop painting people with broad brushes because it puts up fences and it tears down trust. And in my community, I spend a lot of time speaking in English and Spanish to my immigrant community, to my Muslim community, to all communities, that the Austin Police Department, the only ones that need to fear us are those that would do harm to members of our community. And so I think that as we move forward, we have to continue to build bridges to all segments of society instead of tearing them down.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Safe. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe.
I know that Deputy Commissioner Miller had to leave, and I was hoping to have the opportunity to commend and thank him and his folks for what was truly remarkable and amazing response to the terrorist events in New York and New Jersey this past weekend, and the incredible speed at which they were able to identify and apprehend the suspect, Mr. Rahami. I think that probably saved the lives of countless Americans, and of course we're all grateful that Officer Padilla and Investigator Hammer are both expected to make a full recovery from their injuries sustained during their heroic actions. But these events really only underscore how every day members of our law enforcement community, your teams, say goodbye to their loved ones and then go out and put their lives on the line to protect their neighbors. And now, unfortunately, you all are being asked to do not just the traditional jobs that we've always asked law enforcement to do. You now have to answer the call when terrorists attack. And in that respect, you truly are the first line of defense in ensuring that our streets don't become battlefields. And it seems to me that if we're asking you all to go to battle, then the very least that we can do is make sure that you get the type of equipment that you need to protect yourselves and to protect all of us. Now, I will tell you, it's not very often that I get a chance to talk about a federal program that serves a noble purpose like that. And does so effectively, efficiently, and at essentially no cost to taxpayers. Those types of federal programs are about as rare as a $3 bill. But the 1033 surplus program is exactly that kind of program, and I think you all know that. It's a program that allows the Department of Defense to transfer certain surplus defense equipment, which has already been paid for and in many cases already been used to protect our troops, and to repurpose that for our state and local law enforcement to use in counterterrorism activities and counter-drug activities and in emergency situations that arise in our communities all the time. That was the case, anyway, until unilateral executive actions by President Obama, which cut access to that type of critical equipment that agencies like yours depend on. In fact, many of you have had, I assume, to send back some of the equipment that you'd already received from the program. Equipment like tracked armored vehicles, the kind that law enforcement officers in my district say have saved lives in crisis situations, and which double as rescue vehicles in some circumstances. And because of the President's action here, some of the SWAT teams that have had the benefit of life-saving body armor and ballistic helmets won't have that benefit anymore because they can't afford that equipment without this program. So I think the President's actions here are frankly inexcusable. And I think he has put the safety of your officers and his politics ahead of the public safety. So in response to all that, earlier this year I introduced the PLUS Act, the Protecting Lives Using Surplus Equipment Act of 2016, which would reverse the President's executive order and restore that program to law enforcement agencies like all of yours. Sheriff Bouchard, I want to start with you because I noticed you mentioned it in your opening statement. I really want to get your perspective on the administration's unilateral decision to strip this type of equipment from agencies like yours. And in answering that, I'm interested in the policy, of course, but I'm less interested in hypothetical and want to know how this is really affecting officers like the ones that you manage out in the real world.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your leadership on this. We have, I think, pretty much across the board found 1033 extremely helpful in assisting law enforcement in challenging days and times, and I think we saw real-time evidence of that in San Bernardino, the use of armored vehicles and tactical equipment to save lives. In a real-life example, the day that was playing out, we received an order from Washington to return our tracked vehicle that day. And it was loaded on a flatbed, and the intent is to blow it up. And the tracked vehicles around the country are used not just for dangerous armored situations, but there are also diverse terrain across this country, sand and snow. Northern Michigan can get 5 feet of snow, and a tracked vehicle is the only way to get to certain situations. I know San Bernardino found themselves with a running fugitive hunt who had killed a number of people, and they had to actually borrow, I think, Parks cats to be able to drive through some of the deep snow. In my real-life example is we had a running gun battle that lasted almost 12 hours with an individual who had killed a police officer and barricaded himself in a house, was firing a fully automatic weapon, not just out the windows, but through the walls and striking all of the neighbors' homes. We used armored vehicles to evacuate the neighbors and to obviously protect our deployed deputies around the scene as we continued that running gun battle all night long. Towards the end of that gun battle, we wanted to insert into the second story, and the only way we could do that was with an armored vehicle that actually had a ramp to a second story. That armored tracked vehicle was recalled by the federal government. Our region no longer has the ability to have a ramp to a second story and an armored capability. So that literally was saving lives that night and was taken and is intended to be destroyed. So that's the kind of situation we're facing. And I just go a step further. I think most of the real problems are now coming from the rulemakers. I'm the point person on this for Major County Sheriffs of America, and I've been in more meetings than I can count. And in one of the meetings, there were 37 people in the room. 2 of us were full-time law enforcement. So the people making rules, I actually was asked the question in one of these meetings, what caliber is 223? The people making the decisions don't know the equipment or the tactics used with this equipment, and they get to decide how and when and where we use that. I think that's a problem. And they're writing rules that are rather extensive. They keep changing them. They've changed them a number of times. They haven't been formalized, but they're going to be backdated to October of last year, and we don't know what those rules are yet. At one point it was we had to train our whole agency on a specific set of training, department-wide. Not the people that used it or were authorized to call it out, but the whole agency. And so much of this is driven by perception, it's incredibly frustrating. They talk about militarized. Tracked vehicles were removed because they looked too militarized, but you can still get armored vehicles with wheels. Well, that doesn't go to the tactics necessary or the terrain. I had to turn in 12 bayonets because they thought we were fixing bayonets, I guess, and charging homes. They were 12 chrome bayonets used by the Honor Guard at funerals. So we had to go out and buy the bayonets for the Honor Guard that the federal government recalled. So much of this is driven by perception, not by the reality of use or by who's making those decisions, and it's incredibly frustrating.
Thank you, Sheriff. Based on the answer that you just gave me, would you agree with me that the President's decision to eliminate this program is jeopardizing the safety and well-being of your officers?
I certainly would agree with that statement. In fact, I said that after San Bernardino, the sheriff, a friend of mine, said they came prepared and America's less prepared as we sent back our armored vehicles that same day.
Thank you, Sheriff. I'm out of time. Chief, I saw you nodding your head in response to that, so I want to give you a chance to comment on this if you...
I'll be very brief, but whether it's a 1033 program or asset forfeiture, we need to deal with individual departments if they abuse or misuse the equipment or the assets, and not paint the entire profession and hold the entire profession accountable with a broad brush. You remember the MRAPs, everybody hates them. Oh, they evoke images of Iraq. And the Chairman McCall and I had a press conference in Austin where we didn't get one for Austin because my SWAT team that's too big for our city configuration. But I said, when you have floods and we're a state prone to flooding, we need those MRAPs to rescue people. And not a month passed when we had some major flooding in our central Texas. And guess what the PD just south of me used? An MRAP to rescue kids that were stuck inside an elementary school that had basically flooded all around it. And so it's not the equipment, it's the way it needs to be used. And so absolutely the 1033 and asset forfeiture hold the departments accountable that misuse the equipment, and let's not paint the entire profession with a broad brush.
Thank you, Chief. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe. I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and for the members for their questions. Before I conclude, I want to first of all thank all of you. Being in law enforcement for 20 years, when I hear what you discuss, I kind of miss it, to be frank. But I want you to get some comfort out of this, that your words are not falling on deaf ears. We have heard time and again over the last several months in other hearings about we need to do a better job of sharing the information. We need to do a better job of getting state, local, and federal agencies on the same page, especially with respect to background checks and information sharing. And we're mindful of that, and we are in the process of doing things about that. So your testimony does help. The Fusion Center issue really bothered me. I did not realize that was such a, there's so many cuts from the fusion centers. That's very troubling given the fact in the last few years, we're now up to over 1,000 ISIS-related investigations nationwide in all 50 states. It's not a time to be paring it down, it's time to be plussing it up. And we need to take a look at that, and we need to find the funding to make that happen. And lastly, with respect to your colloquy with Mr. Ratcliffe, we have to give you all the tools you need to make things necessary, to keep you as safe as possible, and to make you doing as effective job as you possibly can. We can't do that when you start cutting things. And so we have to be mindful of that, and no matter what happens going forward with the election, we need to convince the administration, whomever it is, that you need to be properly supported. And this is not a time for cuts. This is a time for at least maintaining what you have or plussing it up, because the American people deserve to be safe, and we got to give you the tools to keep them safe. So I commend you all for the job you do. To find that needle in the haystack every day is a brutal task. You know, I wake up every day worried about things I learned on the committee. I can't imagine what you all go through every day. So I thank you for what you do. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask them to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days, and without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen. You are